If you want to understand what the class struggle of the 21st century will look like, you need to understand the concept rent-seeking. It describes the effort to increase one's share of existing wealth without creating new wealth. In this video, I will mention 3 examples of rent-seeking. I will furthermore attempt to make it probable why rent-seeking will be the future ideological battleground, maybe even in this decade. And it will even make sense why there is a puffin in the flag of my thumbnail. First, the property market. Today's property market is classical rent-seeking. Those who own their own home are getting richer and richer without lifting a finger. And those without home ownership are paying the price for the homeowner's free increase of wealth, either by paying higher rent or incurring extreme debt to become a part of the property-owning class. To sustain the accelerating increase of prosperity, the homeowning class is fighting fiercely against new homes being built in local councils worldwide. They have even invented grand narratives. In the UK, the tale to climb the housing ladder is often used as an expression for the path in life you take when you buy your own home and as a result is about to become more prosperous year by year. This and many similar expressions invoke anxiety and FOMO among renters. They ask themselves, will I ever have a chance to succeed financially if I keep renting and don't start climbing the ladder? Affected by this anxious FOMO, they're now more willing to accept extreme and risky debts. In particular, urban millennials and Gen Zers are depressed with this kind of property market. And if political parties are going to have a chance to get their votes in the future, they need to be able to offer a more sustainable property market. However, the property-owning class will fight hard to keep the housing ladder system in place, as it more or less works as a free money printer. Now onto lobbying. Imagine a world where you cannot trust science or maybe even democracy itself, and you more or less got the current state of affairs, even in established democracies. A lot of that can be contributed to lobbying. If you take climate policy as an example, even the most conservative politicians in the 80s like Thatcher and Reagan were ready for change. But then the slick and gifted lobbyists of the fossil fuel industry entered the lobby, so to speak. They paid scientists to research extremely hypothetical scenarios, relativized established scientific findings, and were sometimes even paid to lie. Their attempts to spread pseudoscience were followed up with campaigns to convince politicians that not only was the fossil fuel industry right about climate change wasn't real, they and various fossil fuel heavy industries should also receive anti-competitive funding and regulations from the state. Those who are the angriest may not even be the climate activists on the street, but green investors and entrepreneurs who are ready to turn green infrastructure, green methods of production, and green tech into big business. But thanks to anti-competitive conditions, they have instead lost billions. We already see a rebellion against the fossil fuel lobby from a generation of young entrepreneurs. As the lies of the fossil fuel industry are becoming more evident, we will see rebellion against other sectors that are influenced by a thick layer of lobbyists like big pharma and industrial scale farming, and it will spread like an oil well fire. And the lobbyists in the financial sector may also feel the heat in the process. But I want to dedicate a whole paragraph to the financial sector, because there is no industry more defined as rent-seeking. Let me mention 3 areas where the financial sector makes loads of money without creating much or no value for society. Buying and selling properties. Besides offering private mortgages, investment banks also buy up properties. In many Western countries, around 5 to 10% of all properties are bought by investment banks. And when Blackstone or another greedy investment bank becomes your landlord, rent often increases by a considerable margin. The stock market. We often hear that the stock market is a growth engine, but that's generally not true. When you buy a Google or Apple stock on a stock exchange, no one at Google or Apple gets any money. You just buy a virtual paper that says you own a tiny fraction of that company, from some random dude or bank who bought it from another random dude or bank. It would be much better if that money was invested in new infrastructure or technology. The fact that so much money ends up in the stock market also increases inflation and inequality. A long list of unethical investments. We don't have the whole day, but let me mention 3 examples of unscrupulous financial speculation. 1. The staple food speculation in the noughties that created huge spikes in food prices which led to food shortages. 2. The so-called Cum-Ex scandal, where banks asked for tax refunds in various European states for stocks they no longer owned, for a total value of $63.2 billion. 3. Today's speculation on gas and oil prices that makes gas and oil prices even higher than necessary. We will at least see governments pushing for more of the financial sector's money to be invested in the real economy, for instance to finance the green transition. But we could also see a more radical uprising against the business methods and ethics led by a new generation of politicians and movements such as We Are the 99%. Based on these examples, it can seem a bit strange that there is no significant movement or party that clearly defines themselves as anti-rent-seeking. These are just some examples. We also got bullshit labor, corruption, bureaucracy, incompetent politicians, some elements of tax evasion, oligarchs, protection money schemes. It defines so many areas of this political age. So why is there, for instance, no party in most countries who want to break the economic structures behind the housing ladder, which in decades have made those who don't own their own house poorer and poorer in real economic terms? It does generally seem a bit strange, because millions of voters are affected by this in every capitalist economy on the planet. My theory is that the majority of parties we see in most parliaments are based on old society structures, where your job defined which class you belong to, not if you owned a house or not, what year you were born, or whether you were in a disruptive industry or an established one with many political friends. Were you an industry worker back in the day, you would probably vote on a social democratic or socialist party. Were you a business owner or a high-level executive, you would probably vote conservative or a liberalist party. If you worked in urban office jobs, you would often have some sort of social liberal affiliation, and that was it. Simple. Today, a socialist or a social democratic party both need to appeal to an old baby boomer worker who often owned their own house, and a young millennial worker where the property market is often the very reason they struggle. A pro-business party must seek to satisfy the interest of those who thrive in the status quo market and often finance political campaigns for the party, as well as younger and more disruptive business interests who want a new green direction. Which is impossible. To make things worse, many small business owners don't experience high taxes, but high rent as the biggest hindering to success. And they're often aware that the transition to environmentally balanced economies depend on public funding and taxes on CO2. The best they can offer the millennial and Gen Z voters is often a bit of progressive-sounding identity politics, which usually doesn't cost anything. But what if business-orientated and more left-wing millennials and Gen Zers could work together by having cross-party movements for a fairer housing market, or maybe actually as some sort of anti-rent-seeking party? An Icelandic joke goes: there are 10 million puffins in Iceland, all they need is a charismatic leader. Imply that if these 10 million puffins were united under a charismatic leader, they could take over the country, whose human population is just 360,000. Once in a while it happens, not that puffins take over Iceland, but that new political movements appear out of nowhere under a charismatic figure. I believe an obvious example would be the 7th largest economy in the world, France. Today France is led by Emmanuel Macron. The party he leads, En Marche, he founded himself 6 years ago. When he first got elected in 2017 as the president of France, it was his first ever election, and he won 5 more years in April this year. There is Donald Trump as well. Remember that charisma is very subjective. Or we could mention another populist movement, the Brexit campaign led by Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. But in particular, I think the election of Macron is interesting, both because it was a new party and he managed to unite right and left-leaning voters. And that is precisely what this anti-rent-seeking agenda got the potential to do. Unite a young generation whose primary problem is to afford a house, and an innovative generation of well-educated eager beavers who wants to make their own CO2-friendly businesses or careers that balances ambitions with sustainability. And maybe we have already seen an anti-rent-seeking general election when the Americans chose a president in 2016. The winner, Donald Trump, had an unmistakable rent-seeking rhetoric, referring to lobbyists and bureaucrats he wanted to drain the swamp. He also thought that China, the EU, Mexico, and probably the whole world exploited the US in a rent-seeking-ish manner. Bernie Sanders, who almost got elected as the Democrats' presidential candidate, voiced an even more explicit critique of rent-seeking aspects of the US economy. He expressed radical solutions to solve the housing crisis, harsh critiques of the financial sector, and the many lobbyists in Washington who should take the dirty corporate money out of politics. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most iconic millennial politicians in the world, have sometimes used the term rent-seeking to describe the problems the United States is facing. Jeremy Corbyn too, and he was treated like a rock star among young Brits when he was Labour's Prime Minister candidate. So let's see. Maybe rent-seeking needs to be called something a bit sexy. Maybe it's just about defining the term to the public. Perhaps it will just appear in a series of different movements and grow organically for the generation who can't live with the status quo when it comes to housing and climate. Yeah, let's see. All we need is a charismatic puffin.